When you find a pivot table configuration you like, you should find a way to reconstruct it. There are a number of ways to do that. The most straightforward is to write down the field order that you can see in the pivot table fields pane, but you can also record the actions of creating that configuration using a macro, and I'll show you how to do that in this movie. I will use the record macro sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 8 folder of your exercise files archive. So let's say that I want to record this position. I have the department field in the columns area, month in the rows area, and the sales column in the values area. So department columns, month rows, values, sales. To record a macro in Excel 2013, click the View tab, and then click the Macros buttons down arrow, and click Record Macro. Doing so displays the Record Macro dialog box. You can then type in a name for your macro. I'll call it month rows, and then DEPT for department, COLS. So what I've done is I've created a position called month rows, department columns, and because there's only one data field, I'll just assume that sales will go in the values area. I'm ready to begin recording my macro, so I'll click OK. From now on, everything that I do will be recorded as steps in Visual Basic for applications. The first thing I need to do with the pivot table selected is to click the Analyze Contextual tab, click Clear, and then click Clear All. Doing so clears everything from inside the pivot table, and I can now reconstruct it from the ground up. My configuration was the month field in the rows area, the department field in the columns area, and sales in the values area. I've created the configuration I want, so I can stop recording the macro. To do that, I'll click the View tab, click the Macros buttons down arrow, and click Stop Recording. Now that I've recorded the macro, I can take a look at it. To do that, I click the Macros button, and I see my macro's name. It's highlighted here in blue, and I can click Edit. Pivot table macros are complicated, and that's to be understood. A pivot table is a complicated object, so to create a specific configuration, especially if you go beyond simply arranging fields, takes a lot of steps. What I recommend doing is reading over the macro. For example, remember that I put month in the rows area, and it's in the first position. And then I put the department column in the column field area, and it's also in the first position. What's more, the pivot table is summarizing using the sum operation data from the sales column of the source table. Now that I'm done examining my macro, I can press Alt F11 to return to the main Excel workbook. Recording a macro that recreates a pivot table position is a terrific way to recall a particularly informative or useful configuration quickly. Always remember, though, that the first step after you start recording should be to clear everything from the existing pivot table so you can build it from the ground up.